In this lesson, we're going to cover the book of Esther and Ezra and Nehemiah. We're going to see the God who preserves his people and the God who restores his remnant to the land. Now, Daniel ended with high hope in the coming Messiah's kingdom, but the Israelites were still slaves separated from the promised land. And as the exile grew longer, it increasingly felt like God was distant. Did he really still care for his people? Was he still near to them? Furthermore, would they ever return to the land and experience the full restoration that God had promised would come to them? Now, Esther recalls a key story of the exile in order to highlight how God was indeed present and intent on preserving his people. And then Ezra and Nehemiah highlights how God did indeed restore them to the land, but without changed hearts and with sustained slavery. A much greater restoration would need to come. Now, as you've already guessed, Ezra and Nehemiah stands as one book in Jesus' Bible, and so here we're going to treat it together. Ezra and Nehemiah, a single unified piece. Let's consider the book of Esther. Now, some often miss certain elements. See if you've ever thought of these. Esther's replacement of Vashti as queen recalls David's replacement of Saul and therefore foreshadows the coming of a greater David. This is what we read in Esther chapter 1:19. Esther 1:19. If it please the king, says his counselors, let a royal order go out from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be repealed, that Vashti, your original queen, who was unwilling to display her beauty, is never again to come before King Ahasuerus. And let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. That language, who is better than, occurs only one other place in the entire Old Testament, and it happens in 1 Samuel 15:28, where Samuel says to Saul, the Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you this day and has given it to a neighbor of yours who is better than you. And who was that neighbor? It was David. So somehow, in the deliverance of the kingdom from Vashti to Esther, there is a foretaste for those who have ears to hear of David's replacement of Saul. And for those living in the exile, that would have heightened hope for the ultimate David. Second, Ezra tells the story of how Mordecai, the Benjamite son of Kish, we're told in chapter 2, verse 5, how this certain Mordecai gains victory over Haman, the Agagite, who sought to destroy the Jews. Chapter 9, verse 24. He's called over and over again, this villain, Haman, the Agagite. Now, Mordecai's life reverses the failure of Saul, the Benjamite, who's also called Benjamite son of Kish in 1 Samuel 9, 1 through 2. And it was Saul who refused to kill Agag, the Amalekite, in 1 Samuel 15, that same passage that was already alluded to with respect to the reversal of Vashti to Esther. Agag, the Amalekite. The Amalekites were those whom God declared war against when they tried to destroy the Israelites, just like Haman, the Agagite, was trying to destroy the Israelites in Mordecai and Esther's day. Mordecai, the new Saul, succeeds where the original Saul failed. And the story of Esther then comes to an end, expecting that the new Saul will give rise to the new David, who is the Messianic king. All these allusions to the movement from Saul to David here in this book of Esther. Now, what's also intriguing is that the killing of Haman and his family is done on a tree. In the ESV, it's translated as gallows, but very literally, he is hung on a tree. using the exact same language of what is one who is hung on the tree is cursed. And it's this image of substitution that is then picked up in the life of Christ, who is hung on a tree and becomes a curse for us. Haman is the ultimate vision of evil that is set up like a battle standard, crucified and overcome, dead on this tree. And that's exactly what Christ becomes on our behalf. My summary of Esther: God discreetly and sovereignly preserves his people from Haman's extermination by honoring Esther over Queen Vashti and by honoring Mordecai over Haman, resulting in his people's joy in order to foreshadow the Messiah's future work. Let's consider Ezra and Nehemiah. Now, some of the promises that God would fulfill when Israel returned from exile are these. We know that they anticipated that God would change hearts and fill people with his Spirit so that they could obey him fully. Deuteronomy 30, Ezekiel 36. We know that the Messiah was supposed to rise and rule over native Israelites and redeemed foreigners alike. We know that God would reign over and through Jerusalem's multi-ethnic citizens as they would replace the Ark of the Covenant in the Holy of Holies. And as God would dwell among them and make them a holy people. We know that God's multi-ethnic people dwelling under the Davidic tent would live in a garden paradise forever. We know that God's servants would obey his word, that they would serve the new King David, and that they would enjoy God's presence forever. Throughout the prophets, all of these visions about the future are laid out. So we come to Ezra and Nehemiah, seeing, isn't the exile over? They've returned to the land. And what we find out is that none of these restoration promises comes to fruition. My summary of Ezra and Nehemiah: despite God returning his people to the land and enabling them to successfully rebuild Jerusalem's temple and its surrounding walls, Israel remains in exilic slavery. And that same Israel fails to faithfully obey the terms of the covenant. And therefore, this book shows the people's deep need for the transforming work of the Messiah after the exile is over. Ezra, Nehemiah.